Let's talk about food security, particularly for people with special needs, specialized attention, people living with disability. You know, the World Food Program projected that this year, 33.1 million Nigerians will face acute food insecurity. But do we really talk about this topic holistically? Well, let's have that conversation. We're joined on the program by the Country Director, Nigeria CBM Global Disability Inclusion, Abdulaziz Musa, joining us from our Abuja studio. Good morning and welcome to the Morning Brief. Let's get right into it. You know, there's that danger of food insecurity already, but a lot of people don't talk a lot about, you know, people living with disability, how this affects them in terms of access to that food in the first place, research about what kind of food is even best for them. It looks like in a world that people are being left behind, people with disability are even being left behind them more. So what challenge are we dealing with here?
Absolutely. Thank you very much and good morning. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak about this very important topic. Yeah, very right. You know, persons with disability are even further left behind, you know, in this conversation. So first of all, what do we, you know, it's important to understand, you know, what do we even mean by inclusive food security or right to food? Essentially, it's about ensuring that no one is left behind in the fight against hunger and malnutrition. And it's about also ensuring that we deploy all policies and address systemic barriers to ensure adequate supply of food and sustainable food production in a way that everybody is carried along. Like you rightly said, persons with disabilities have historically been marginalized in these conversations. And this is, you know, no surprise, because if you look at our culture, you know, as individuals, you know, once we hear a person with disability, you know, the thing that comes into our mind, it's, you know, very negative. So you see families where, you know, if they have a person with disability, they tend to think it's some, you know, witchcraft or some very negative cultural belief. And what that does, it excludes. And even when we have laws and policies in place, like the act that was signed in 2018 and provides for the protection of persons with disabilities, you still see that persons with disabilities are still left behind. And even the policies are not adequately funded to ensure that persons with disabilities are taken care of. And there are certain principles when you're talking about inclusion of persons with disabilities, especially around right to food. So first of all, is non-discrimination. Is, you know, ensuring that everybody, regardless of your race, your gender, you are not denied access to food. And unfortunately, in Nigeria now, you know, persons with disabilities, when you go to centers, for example, maybe if you go to the market, you hardly see persons with disabilities. And the reason is very simple. It's not accessible. And I had a friend last week who was telling me a story of how he went to a supermarket here in Abuja, and he was denied entry, and simply because he was a person with disability. So the mindset is that a person with disability is a beggar, and they are not allowed, you know, that entry. The other thing is also accessibility. So ensuring that the right information, physical buildings, markets are accessible for these persons with disability. So if a market is not accessible, you know, to start with, how can a person with disability even participate in, you know, buying and selling, or how can he even go to that market? So those are, you know, some practical issues that needs to be addressed. And I'm happy that Nigeria is making progress towards that by passing the law that recognizes the fundamental rights of persons with disability. And I think to ensure that this is sustainable is to really see food as a fundamental human right, which is also recognized in the you know, United Nations conventions on right to food. So inclusion, it goes mere beyond inclusion of persons with disability, or inclusive right to food goes beyond just, you know, providing food, but it ensures, or it ensures that systemic barriers are addressed in a way that persons, most vulnerable persons or communities are able to participate meaningfully in, issues around food security.
If you can hear me. Okay, so, legislation is not in short supply. Apparently, legislation is not in short supply as far as whatever it is we want to do in Nigeria. It's about, number one, people being acquainted with these pieces of legislation. On the other hand is the implementation of this legislation, if you will, and then enforcing people who default on the laws that guide some of these spaces. If you were to propose effectiveness, looking at these three layers that I've mentioned, what's the best form to get the kind of results so that the persons with disability will feel that sense of inclusion?
I think we need to situate this in the context. Like I said earlier, we live in a society where there's a lot of stigma and discrimination against persons with disabilities. So I think what is really important, because even our politicians, our leaders, or the persons that are supposed to implement the law, they are part of the society that we all live in. So what is important is for us to orientate and disabuse our minds from such beliefs, that keeps us progressing backwards. So it's important that organizations of persons with disabilities, the persons that are also living with the persons that are also with having those disabilities, the lived experiences, are empowered to be able to advocate, so that people are aware that this disability is not a cause. And anybody, unfortunately, with the kind of roots that we have, with the conflict we have, anybody can be disabled at any time. So, and these people also have a whole lot to offer. So if we start from there and, get people to really value and see them as individuals who have something to offer to the development of the country, then our mindset will begin to shift. Because if you look at the law that has been passed, unfortunately, last year, the moratorium passed, which gave about 5 years for public buildings, for example, government buildings to adjust, to make it more accessible. But if you go around today, you see that, the implementation is quite very poor. And, when you speak with people, you hear them say things around, the cost is high. Of course, we need to ensure everyone is not left behind, so which means we need to also invest in the right places. There is something that we call reasonable accommodation, which means addressing certain barriers that limit or hinder the full and meaningful participation of persons living with disability. For example, the use of sign language interpreters, the use of hearing aids, having ramps in place, such things requires investments. And for that investment to be in place, it's important that the persons, responsible for enacting our laws, are also very aware and sensitized on the needs of persons with disabilities. Right. It's only that way that we'll be able to achieve that, that objective. Okay. And we can achieve this by empowering persons with disabilities themselves to advocate for themselves. Because that's one key thing. Sometimes because of historical marginalization, you see that they do not have the kind of agency or the confidence to do that on their own. So it's important that they are given that space and also empowered, especially organizations of persons with disabilities, to do that.
Okay, speaking of advocacy for themselves, we've had this conversation relatedly, with other representatives of the group in recent times. And one of the, things that came through was the absence of data. And now we're talking about access of persons with disability to food security. Is there any specific data that we can rely upon that can tell us, okay, these are the numbers of persons with disability who are into agriculture, such that the interventions that they now require in terms of access to market, loans, can be made available to these persons that we can verify that indeed they are persons with disability who are into agriculture? And do you trust that the Nigeria Persons with Disability Commission can champion this, or is it already championing it So what information can you provide for us in that regard?
Sadly, I would say we do not have adequate data, and this is no different with majority of other sectors. And you're absolutely right, because if we do not have data, then how can we adequately make provisions for the needs of the persons with disabilities? And yes, the Commission for Persons with Disabilities can rightfully champion this, and it has started, with the engagement it's having with different stakeholders. You also have different organizations of persons with disabilities, such as the network umbrella body, like JONAPID, who is also championing data collection. But I think it's important that, in all that we do, for example, in the census, which is being carried out, now not done, different programs of government, such as social protection programs, intervention programs that have been implemented in different states, that data on disability is also captured. And this is really, really key, because if we do not have that, just like with any other sector, it's not going to be possible. Today we have, over 30 million, according to the report, different data that we're looking at. And this is also, debatable, and I know we have more than that. But imagine 30 million people, that's about a state, of persons, or even more than a state of people living with persons with disabilities. So if we're not able to, ascertain those needs and plan, then you can be rest assured that, we'll still be going back in circles.
Very important point
without adequately addressing those specific needs. And what is even more important, in the rooms where these discussions are held, it's key that persons with the lived experiences themselves are in that room. We have an old saying that you cannot barb, in your house, that you cannot eat onions, with somebody's mouth. So it's important that those persons are there, which is, nothing without us, nothing about us without us. So it's really important. It's not just a slogan, because if you do not wear the shoe,
Mr. Musa,
they certainly would not know.
And I think that's a really great place to anchor on this point. Nothing for us without us is a very, very important saying. And for people who, when they hear anything disability, they just tune off. You need to change your ways. But we have to thank you so much, Mr. Abdulaziz Musa, Country Director, Nigeria, CBM, Global Disability Inclusion. Thank you for your time and for reminding us of some of these very important issues. Thank you. Well, there you have it. That's what we anchor on the show this morning. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Kayode Okikulu. We
promise an even better package, a bumper one, tomorrow. I am Bukola Kuka.
I'm Jeffrey Uzama. Bye-bye. Sunrise Daily is up at the top of the hour.